So I guess I'll tell a little story of what happened, how I got to Birmingham, how I got to be living where I'm living now. Wow, I could take it way back. Okay, just for the sake of like brevity, and there's something particular I want to speak about, I'll keep things kind of short. This is like the abbreviated version. But essentially, once upon a time, um, I was detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act. And that was an incredibly valuable time for me. And looking back, it was absolutely necessary. And it gave me access to treatment that saved my life without question. I'm incredibly grateful to this country and to the systems that have been in place to help me continue to be here. Very, very lucky. And I got treatment that many people who deserve it will never get because of the fact that, resources are, I wouldn't say resources are scarce, but I think the way they're managed is probably not to everyone's advantage. But anyhow, so once upon a time, me and Section 3 um, in a little tiny town kind of hidden away in Wales where I received treatment. By treatment, I just mean what you would expect people would get, but often don't. Things like talking therapies, things like occupational therapy that goes beyond like how to make a sandwich. Um, and so for a couple of years, in fact, um, I was relieved of my ability to go wherever I wanted. And, for a time I was contained in a um, in a place which I will not name just for the sake of simplicity, I guess. And it was, yeah, it was a life-saving experience for me. And in fact, being excluded from society for a while took a lot of the pressure off me. I didn't feel like I had to achieve anything during that time. Merely kind of looking after myself was achievement enough. And then beyond that, when I was ready, a couple of years later, I was discharged and I moved to the beautiful town of Shrewsbury in Shropshire, or Shrewsbury if you have more money. Um, anyhow, so, and again, very, very fortunate thanks to family support. I actually had a flat of my own and I lived there for a couple of years in a really beautiful town. If you ever get the chance, Shrewsbury's like really historical and very beautiful to look at. And at the same time, quite kind of cosmopolitan. It's got lots of funky wine bars and cocktail places, and it's kind of a very nice quality of life. I was warned about Shrewsbury as being the graveyard of ambition, just because it's so pleasant, and definitely is. I've been back a couple of times, and it's really beautiful. So then I suppose having grown accustomed to the the novelty of my freedom again, and having kind of become complacent almost with the fact that my life was so comfortable, I began thinking, well, okay, so what's next? And if I'm honest, I think at that time, whilst I was very pleased with how I was doing, how I was getting on in life, the new friends that I'd made some wonderful friends in Shrewsbury, musicians, most of them, and I used to have a lot of fun going out and about town playing, um, and and having fun and having dinner parties, and it was a lovely time. But then the big question of what's next for you, young man? What's next? So I think in that time I was very much less open to talking about things like my mental health, and for the most part, I think I just allowed people to assume whatever they want to about me, and I didn't really tackle the topic, um, and I I was definitely carrying a lot of shame about it, um, shame that I'm still carrying now, but to a lesser degree, and powered by that shame, I thought, you know what I'll do? Um, I remember my father saying something to me about, well, you're a promising young man. My father, who I don't really know at all, by the way, but still kind of gave a lot of importance to. Um, and he said something about, well, maybe you should try law. Um, my father was a cultural attaché, which I still don't really know what that means. I think it's kind of loosely related to kind of public relations, something like that. And I think I looked up to him in some strange way. Strange because I didn't really know him, but I still looked up to him somehow. So I thought, yes, law. That will make me feel like um, loved like the son that I never felt I was. So perhaps that'll fill me up inside. So I worked pretty hard, and I did an access course. And next thing, I've got an offer from the University of Birmingham to study the law, and I felt very pleased with myself about that. Um, so yeah, at Birmingham, you know, after this period of 2 or 3 years of stability, quietness, my own private place to live, and I find myself in Birmingham, and it's safe to say that that was like the most traumatic time I'd had for years. Um, it wasn't so much the scale of the work, which for me was enormous. I mean, there's no shadow of a doubt that um, whilst I achieved pretty well at school, it had been a whole decade since I'd been at school, pretty much, and I was I was kind of mentally less kind of sharp than I used to be. It's just habits, I guess. You get in habits, you get out of habits. I was definitely out of the fucking habit of processing enormous amounts of information, or what seemed like enormous amounts of information, in a very short space of time. I found that incredibly stressful. And there's me, I'd never really lived with anyone. All of a sudden, I'm living with, like a whole bunch of people I didn't know, all of which had their own kind of interesting qualities to contribute. And the truth is, I didn't handle it very well at all. Um, I found myself extremely anxious. I think in the first couple of months, I lost like over a stone in weight just because I felt too anxious to share the living space to cook myself a meal. Um, it was an incredibly traumatic time. Um, just the realization that my brain wasn't quite what it was, or that I hadn't kind of I haven't I hadn't maintained the habits that I once had. I was nothing ever less than like an A or a B student at school, the odd A star. I never thought of myself as an extremely intelligent person. I just thought I really worked fucking hard, and I did. Um, so I didn't feel gifted or anything, but I always achieved very highly. And so the biggest suffering, and I guess you could call this kind of transformational suffering. I had changed as a person. I had lost certain habits, but my brain still thought I was the same person. And when life around me didn't confirm that, it was a fucking scary time. I was like, but why am I struggling so hard at this? I used to be able to do this. But I made sure for the sake of my ego to pass my first year. I think I came out with a 2-2, um, which again was a bit of a humbling experience for me. Um, but I think the thing that made it so hard is that I'd realized, I was super motivated to study when it came to getting into Birmingham. Um, and incidentally, I think the University of Birmingham is amazing, so good. I've got nothing bad to say about it. The course, the standard of the teaching and everything was just phenomenal. But what made it so hard was not necessarily the workload. It's the fact, I think by that point I'd realized where where my intention to study had come from. And I think my self-awareness had caught up with me by then, and I realized that for me, I just thought that maybe if I became a law student, or a moving forwards a solicitor or a barrister or something, no one would ever guess that I'd struggled with mental illness. No one would ever guess that my mind had failed me at points, if you want to say that. No one would ever guess that I'd ever been psychotic. Um, and I think knowing that my motivation came from a deep sense of that I was somehow not not good, that my studying of law was basically me living out the idea that I was a mistake, that living out the idea that my experience was bad, like my experience is something to be ashamed of, that I should cover the fuck up who I am because it's somehow shameful or disgusting or um, something to be forgotten. In fact, I remember going about my initial studies with such enthusiasm because I thought, what what a great way, what better way than massive success than to take revenge against the world. I'll take revenge against the world for what it's done to me through my success. So I was powered by a lot of kind of really um, hateful intentions, angry against myself, angry against the world. I went into law not wanting to defend anyone's rights or, stand up for anything noble. Um, I went into the study of law so that I could be successful, um, so that I could be successful to make up for how hurt I felt. And that's what made it impossible to study hard, because I knew deep down there was something really rotten about that. And I knew deep down that no matter how successful I became, if it was always powered by the idea that my success was to cover me up, that would never be a nice life. It would never be a good life. The car would never be big enough. The house would never be fancy enough. None of it would have ever been enough, I think, because for as long as it was there to cover up my experience, no matter how big the success, it would always be a reminder of the fact that there was something I couldn't stand about myself. So, yeah, regardless of that, I'm kind of grateful still, um, that those choices were made, because it kind of put me in motion again. I guess in the life I was living before all this, yeah, it was comfortable, but I didn't necessarily come into contact with things that were encouraging me to take a good look at my life so much. In my comfort, there wasn't so much awareness of the things that I would say now, yeah, they do cause me to struggle. And I would say I am depressed more now than I was then, because life doesn't meet the expectations I had of myself. I guess in my own quiet little comfortable world, I could make I could make up ideas that I was, further along the line than I really was. I could make up the ideas that I was happy with life, satisfied with life. Um, it was a lot easier back then. Little simple things like being able to have a drink every now and again. I didn't drink heavily, but I think I drank enough to take the edge off the idea of loneliness, or um, the fact that there were areas of my life that weren't exciting to me, or weren't fulfilling to me, or the idea of having a greater purpose with my work didn't matter so much because I was comfortable. And I'm not devaluing comfort. I think comfort's really important in good measure. And if anything, my life's gone too far the other way now. I've got so little comfort. Okay, I'll rephrase it. I mean, I'm very lucky to live in a comfortably safe house, but the bricks and the furniture don't make a house a home, really. I think there's something missing in my life in terms of that. But I'm very lucky to live in a very secure area, in a nice neighborhood, and I'm comfortable in that sense. But comparing my life back to when I was living alone in my flat, I'm a lot less comfortable now. But at that same time, I do believe that there's opportunities for me to learn about myself.